or early evening as it may be, is going to be talking about a topic that is, well, I think we all wrestle with content. And what is content? And should we make it? Should we buy it? Should we rent it? Does anybody care about content? What's going on with content? Matt is going to answer all of those questions for us today. I'd like to introduce Matt Kumin. Matt is the founder and CEO of a company called Publish This, and we're looking forward to hearing from him.
Hello everyone, I'm Matt. How's everyone doing? Good. So I'm going to speak for about 15 minutes and then I'll get to have a cocktail with you. I'm really excited to be back in Austin. I went to college here, so it's always great to be back here. And I want to thank BML for giving me the opportunity to speak to you. They listed me as a content marketing futurist, so I'm kind of excited about that title. It's the first time I've gotten a futurist title, so excited to talk about it. What I want to do is spend a little bit of time just giving you some thoughts from my experience. I've been working in content operations and building content businesses for almost 20 years. And I did this primarily at Edmunds.com, the automotive site. And when I was at Edmunds, basically had about 60 writers that we put on that team. And we created a lot of content there, one of the largest content operations on the internet. And really what that was is a lot of people driving cars and writing reviews and creating authoritative, trusted content to help consumers make a good purchase on their next car purchase. But really when you look at that model, it was a heavy production model. We were creating a lot of content from scratch, writing content, authoring content. Publish This, the company that I started 4+ years ago, is a new kind of content marketing technology platform. And it's really designed to think about how to scale content in a content operation using technology. So some different ways to kind of think about the challenge. And so really, I'm going to sort of fuse together my thoughts and thinking from my time at Edmunds, along with having started and now running Publish This. We work with a number of brands such as Fiji Water and 3M, e-commerce companies like LegalZoom, media companies like Ziff Davis and MTV. So it really kind of runs the gamut across a number of different types of businesses. So when we think about sort of the challenges of content marketing, there's a few things that come to mind. I think the first thing is really thinking about this kind of consumer journey and your customers. And it's been called the purchase funnel or the funnel. These are different ways we can talk about it, but it's really changed. And it's changing dramatically, even as we speak, from sort of traditionally awareness and consideration and ultimately to purchase. And now what you've got is this whole loyalty loop that's happening. So people are in the process of going on the internet, they're getting information, they're talking to their friends, and then they ultimately get to a place where they buy something, and there's a whole opportunity in terms of moving them through this process. Content has an interesting place in the journey, and ultimately how you connect with those kinds of customers after they bought something, or visited your site, or visited your Facebook page. I think the real challenge, just right out of the gate, is it's just hard for brands to be unique and relevant. How do you connect with customers and engage them without selling something all the time? How do you create an experience with them that's meaningful, that they're going to get value out of, is a real challenge. And the other challenge is that everything's just moving so quickly. Everything's happening in real time. And I think Twitter and Facebook, certainly, when you think of the news feed, and some folks were talking earlier when we were looking at the water.org example, where things are just happening in that feed. I think that's a big factor that's going on. And we really look at this and we think that really every one of you, pretty much everybody in this room, whether you think of it this way or not, are either becoming or already have become publishers. And so this isn't necessarily the thing that maybe you started out thinking that you're going to do, is you're going to get into publishing. But when you think about engaging an audience online, content is such a central part of this. and understanding how to publish and creating the kind of technology and operational scale and framework to deal with it is something that I want to explore here. So, there's definitely efforts that are going on, and we're all working to kind of develop more muscles and to improve our processes. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you don't want your operation to look like this. And while there's certainly opportunity to create content at scale, when you think about traditional media, there's a lot of lessons that we can learn from it, and we don't have to necessarily repeat all the things that have been done in terms of, you wouldn't get a printing press right now if you were going to build a website. So we get to today and we say, what's a brand, a marketer, an agency? What are you supposed to do? How do you attack this issue? The first thing that we look at, and we think is important, is that you embrace technology to monitor what's actually happening in your industry. And one way to do that is to look at what's trending. What are the topics that your customers care about? What are they interested in? And what's the content that's trending? What's happening in social? What's being shared? What's being retweeted? What are your customers doing? And having the kind of technology that can monitor your industry and what your customers care about. The other thing that's important is thinking about how to become more of a trusted authority. How do you engage a customer by creating and organizing and distributing content experiences that are relevant and add value? So a couple examples. LegalZoom's a client of ours. Small businesses go onto their website to file a trademark search and to do different things to scale their legal things that they need to do. But they don't really have an ongoing relationship with their customers all the time. So can they create content that's more specific to startups and small businesses? If I'm Home Depot, I'm in the business of selling lumber, but ultimately, I ultimately want to think about being in the business of home improvement ideas. So what are the adjacent areas in your business that your customers care about that may not be a direct hit on what you're selling or what products and services you have, but can gain thought leadership around those kind of areas and drive that kind of thinking and try to engage them, whether it be on the website, whether it be in email newsletters and social or mobile. This is a great quote from Paul Adams at Facebook. When you think about the way you want to engage now, everything is moving so quickly and it's in this feed kind of mentality. So this idea of kind of being fast and frequent. People are snacking and scanning content. They're not, especially on the internet, they're not reading 2,000 word articles. They're not engaging for that long. So how can you increase your frequency and how can you do it more often? The other thing to think about is, and what we've seen, and this happened to us at Edmunds, we started out with a website, and we then had email newsletters, and then suddenly we needed to do SEO in the early 2000s, so we hired an SEO manager, and we had an SEO person for that. And then social started coming along, and then we had a social person. And what you end up with is a bunch of different divisions where different people are managing these things. But the question is, how do you think about it cohesively in a way that can feed all of your channels, web, email, social, and mobile, at scale, in a way that's going to connect the customer? Because the customer is interacting with these channels. They're not just in one channel. So if you tweet something out in Twitter, you put it on Facebook, ultimately you want them to come back to your website. When they come back to the website, you want them to follow up and maybe sign up for a newsletter and get more updates from you. So thinking about content cohesively across all these channels is really key. And to do that, we think there's a new mix that we all need to think about. And that mix is really thinking about not just original content you're writing or creating, but thinking about curation, thinking about licensed content, thinking about even aggregating third-party content. So really thinking about content, all of the content you own, the content you want to bring in, and thinking about it holistically and having the systems that can process that and organize it. We like to say, that it's pretty hard to be a good writer, but we think there's a lot more potential for people to be curators. And the idea is really that as content is flowing and people are writing about it, your teams can have perspective on what's important and why it's interesting. And being able to curate and package and mix and add your own comments on top of content is really where all this is going. And it also allows you to be a lot more nimble. The other trend to think about is really around, and a lot of people talk about native advertising, but it's really as you establish a content experience or a content feed about whatever that topic is. So if in that example, Home Depot, if you're creating great content around home improvement, and it's the best content on the web, plus whatever you're writing, and tips and advice, and ideas on how to build a deck or manage a garden, thinking about ways to promote the products and services that you're trying to promote. But doing that in the form of content and content promotions, things that are more native to the experience. So one of the things we did at Edmunds is, when I first got there, people were worried about this in terms of placing car advertisements next to car content. And ultimately what we found is that people didn't really want to click on all the flashy ads, but when the car companies started creating promotions that were more information driven and more value add, what's the gas mileage on the car? What's the horsepower? What are the benefits? Those kind of promotions got embedded into the site. The click rates were up, the customers were happy, the users were happy, and the brands and the marketers were happy. So thinking about this more natively and in a more integrated way. Personalization, a lot of people talk about personalization. The way we like to think about personalization, I'll give you an example of one of our clients in the media space, the Sporting News. So the Sporting News publishes and runs all the sports content on AOL, and they use Publish This, our technology, to help them with that. But one of the things that they do is they look at the likes that their customers have and their audience has, and what sports teams that they like. And they read through the graph to see what those likes are, and then they provide content that's related to those likes. So what they do is they basically marry what their customers' interests are to the kind of content that customer wants. So they have an iPad app that reads in the Facebook graph, and if you like 4 or 5 different sports teams, pro, college, whatever it may be, it reads it in, it pulls in real-time news feeds that are related to those sports teams, and instantly personalizes that iPad application. But at its core, what they're doing is they're marrying the content to their customers' interests. The other thing that's critical, obviously, is the analytics and the measurement. One of the things that you can think about is, who are the publishers in your category that are publishing interesting content? Who are the Twitter voices in your category that are producing a lot of content? How can you bring them together? How can you curate, aggregate, organize it into more of that resource, and then have the capability to track it, to understand what people are clicking on, what sources they're coming from, whether it's your own content. I like to say sometimes it might be a tweet of an expert in your industry. It could lead to more clicks, subscriptions, downloadable white papers, e-commerce transactions, and it may not be the super expensive video that you created from scratch. Increasingly, there's a lot of content like that on the internet, and it's really organizing it, tracking it, and then understanding what the return on it is. All right, so we're just a few minutes away from ending up here. So when we think about what the future really looks like, how do you kind of bring all these challenges together? And the way we think about it is that the next big role in content marketing is going to be something called the CMM. It's the Content Marketing Manager. And the way to think about this is, this could be someone in the PR department, it could be someone in social media, SEO, email management, but it's really bringing all this together. It's bringing the web, email, social, and mobile together in a way that unifies this. So all the content that comes in is organized, it's brought in through technology, and ultimately provides an easy way to publish it back out across all your channels. So we think this role is emerging. We think it's going to be a central role, and we think content really connects all these different disciplines together. And really the last slide is, like I said, not only are you becoming publishers, but we think today all businesses are publishers, and the key is really embracing it, There's a lot of opportunity out there, but you have to start to think about a framework, a set of technology, and operationalizing this in a way where you're thinking about content not just as an exercise to hire 3 or 4 writers and produce a blog, but how do you really scale content the way a media company would do it, the way a publisher would do it across all your marketing channels. So that's it. Thank you. So I know we have a lot of marketers in here, so I'll open it up to questions and see if I can answer them. Yes?
Yeah. In terms of building a curated portal, are more of your clients building it as a subdomain of their main site or a standalone site? What do you favor?
Well, I think that's a great question. We get that question a lot. I think that it depends on what kind of business you are. We have e-commerce customers who have built years of traction with their e-commerce sites, and the last thing they want to do is put a bunch of content right in front of the shopping cart, at the bottom of the funnel. So for some of those kind of clients, it may be creating a new brand or an adjacent location like a new site and driving it through SEO, through paid, through social, and building up kind of that new kind of brand authority. We have other clients where they want the content and the experience to be added into the sites that they have. So it could be in the form of a subdomain. And really, what we did at Edmunds, when I got to Edmunds, it was basically a lead generation site, and people would submit price quotes to car dealerships. And so we invested heavily in a big content operation, essentially to kind of create the top of the funnel. And we attracted a lot of people who wanted the value and the insights that we were bringing, but we still led them through that journey. And ultimately, a percentage of them would fill out the form for insurance or price quotes. So in that case, it was the core site. I mean, we actually made major changes to the core site to bring the content through and lead to some of the monetization at the bottom of the funnel. Yes?
Have you seen good models of how things are leveraged today for their content sites?
Have I seen good models?
How companies are leveraged LinkedIn today?
LinkedIn?
Yeah. New content publishers. I know it's huge already.
Well, I think the thing with LinkedIn today is really the more that you can, and this is more just putting content into LinkedIn and through your network, the more social activity that you get, their algorithms and some of that will pick that up. But LinkedIn's doing some interesting things where it's a lot of it's about LinkedIn, and LinkedIn acting more like their own publisher or acting like a media company. The area that we've seen progress though is with LinkedIn groups, is sort of focusing on LinkedIn groups, looking at areas that are more niche, more verticalized, where you can make more of an impact within that. But the overall part of LinkedIn today, they're controlling a lot of that, and it's hard to kind of pierce that with any silver bullet. Yes.
What are the key measures of success that you use?
So we judge it in a few different ways. One of the things we look at, the first part we look at is the time and the cost that it takes to produce content, the making of content. We're seeing a lot of examples with curation where you can write snippets of content that are SEO friendly. So think a few hundred words of content, package up interesting content around a trend or a topic. And we're seeing from just a sheer production volume and time that if you were going to write an original blog post, typically that might take an hour or 3 hours to write. That's what the feedback we get. And we're seeing in a curation model where you can use some of the monitoring technologies to discover content, where you're being inspired kind of by what's trending and what's out there, and kind of jumping and capitalizing on that. That if you're curating or annotating around the content, you can do that in 20 or 30 minutes. So the first thing that we look at is, can we reduce the cost side or increase the volume kind of at current cost? Not to replace original content in terms of typical articles, but just to mix it differently. So you might write a few articles that are longer thought pieces, but you want to have increased frequency and do it in a more lightweight model. So that's the first side. Second side is more looking at sort of what we call the return on content. What are the clicks that are driving the business? and which is really engagement. So within a feed of content, are they clicking on a tweet? Are they clicking on an article? Are they clicking on a video? And is the click rate going up? The third metric is SEO. So as you're creating the original content, getting that to rank. So that's not really any different. It's just you're doing it sort of cheaper and faster. And then the last metric is really around conversions. So can you take the content and drive conversions, and whether it's subscriptions, whether it's lead gen, whether you're selling something and it's someone's paying for something. But thinking about that whole thing holistically. So with our clients, we look at all the metrics. And depending on what they're trying to do, some clients are trying to just do thought leadership, and it's really about scaling the content operation quickly and at scale and cost. Other clients who are more e-commerce or lead gen, they're trying to drive conversions, so they're looking at clicks and is it driving the actual business.
For lead generation purposes, what types of content do you see trending, like videos versus infographics, and for specifically B2B?
Yes, so with B2B, yeah, infographics definitely are popular and trend. I think that the way we like to think about it with B2B is there's a lot of opportunity to kind of create that thought leadership, in a lot of cases by bringing in multiple voices who are experts in that industry. And in some ways in B2B, it can be a little easier than B2C in the sense that it's a little bit more organized to begin with, in terms of who those experts are. So if you were trying to do this, in an area, let's say around the electronics industry or in the legal profession, there might be certain bloggers or certain Twitter voices in the legal industry who are experts on intellectual property law. So you could bring those together and organize them and monitor their tweets, monitor their blog posts, curate that together and kind of repost that back out with whatever insights you have. And so we're seeing, though, that the trending around that, infographics definitely, and then, you'd be surprised about the sources. So the typical sources that you would think would rank the most in terms of being shared or liked or retweeted, it's not just the popular publishers. There's a lot of niche blogs and a lot of emerging publishers who are not the obvious ones. And so being able to also sort of see that through technology to monitor it and discover that, you may discover there's voices in your industry that you didn't even know about that you really should organize and bring into your website. Yes?
It's a fast and frequent, we for sure see that with Facebook and Pinterest and whatever. Do you think that there's a backlash coming in the same way that fast food created its own backlash? Now we have slow food. Do you think that people are getting ready to be able to take more time and going to be more selective in what they consume?
Yeah, I mean that's certainly a factor, and I think that the other way that I think it's important to think about this is different categories need different sort of plans of attack, right? So if you're in the celebrity space, or you're in politics, or you're in business, those sports, those categories are moving in terms of content frequency. They're moving at warp speed. If you're in a category like home improvement, or you're in a category like food, it may not be moving as quickly. And so what I think the more important point is, if you look at the frequency of your publishing operation, and there's content out on the web that's really good content that's being created, that's happening every day, and you're publishing once a month or once a week, that's what I'm talking about, is looking at your category and are you moving at the speed of your category? Because I agree with you, there can be too much. So that's definitely a good point. Almost the cocktails. Any other questions? All right, thanks everybody.